Hello and welcome to Size Me. This tutorial is for the Florence skirt, which I can try to show you. I am wearing. Move that back for you. I love that it swishes. I love the swishy detail. I'm wearing it today with the Florence boxy tee tucked in at the front, apparently like the French do. Gives you a really lovely waistline because I haven't got a great waistline, but the t-shirt hides a multitude of sins, so it's really nice and flouncy, guys, and hopefully you love it as much as I do. I have presumed at this point that you have cut your fabric out and that you have transferred all of your construction marks onto your material. If you need a little bit of help with that, if you pop back to the YouTube channel, you should find some tutorials to help you with those things specifically. But for this purpose, I'm assuming that you're already good to go, or good to sew, as we like to say. So I have in front of me here my skirt that I've cut out. There was just a little trick that I wanted to show you, because the fabric that I have, you will notice, looks exactly the same on both sides, the right and wrong side. Now this happens a lot. And it can really get you confused, and you could end up spending all this time making a beautiful project, but something's the wrong way around, and it's incredibly frustrating. So my tip is to get yourself a piece of soap. You can do it with tailor's chalk, but soap gives you that guarantee that it's going to wash off. This was acquired from some hotel at some point that I've stayed in. But what you can do, and you decide, you're going to put a cross on either all of the wrong sides or all of the right sides. Now I always do it on the right side, it's just a habit that I've got into, and I'll just show you. You literally are going to put a cross on it so that when I'm sewing I know that that is the right side of the fabric. It really does help you guys as you're going through your projects, not just for this project but any of the other projects that you do. This Florence skirt has to be made out of a fabric that has a flounce to it, has a drape to it. And with that brings its own problems, because you're working with quite a slippy, slidey fabric. And it might be the first time that you've ever done that. So we'll go through a few hints and tips in the beginning of the instructions written down to show you how to do that. The biggest tip is pin, pin, pin. You never have too many pins. It's only the pins that are keeping it in the right position. So if you've only got a few pins in between, it's going to move all over, more so than a woven fabric, a heavier woven fabric. Okay, so pins, pins, pins. I have tested my machine. I suggest you do this every time you do a new project, just with some scrap, just two sides, two thicknesses of fabric, and just run it through your machine. You'll discover then whether you have any problems with tension and any problems with needle. So for this particular fabric, I've gone down a needle. So I'm using a size 80 because it's much better with this fabric. It doesn't click it because it's nice and thin fabric. You should have all of your bits and pieces ready to go, guys. Important, I would also like to know that you have your instructions with you. Combination of me chatting you through and looking at the instructions will really help. So have them both with you. I will refer to them at different times, but hopefully you enjoy this project as much as I do. The first step, I've assumed that you've done, which is cutting out all the instructions. The next step is to do some stay stitching. So if you bear with me, I'll meet you at the sewing machine. Right, so we're at the machine and we're going to do the stay stitching. So step 2 is asking us to put a stay stitch along the waistband edge of both the front and back yoke pieces. Now a stay stitch does exactly what it suggests. It's to ensure that the fabric stays in the correct place. So some fabrics open up as you touch and use them. The weave opens up and therefore you increase in the size. So when it then comes to putting the waistband on or the facing, you find that you've got too much fabric. So stay stitching makes the fabric stay in the right location. Now it's kind of a temporary stitch, but we don't take it out. But what we don't want to do is to see this stay stitching. So instead of stitching it at the 1.5 centimetre mark that we would ordinarily do, we're going to stitch it at 1 centimetre. So I've got the edge of my fabric here lined up with 1 centimetre, and we're just going to stitch all the way across. Notice I just have one single bit of fabric. Nothing is together. It's just one piece of fabric. We're just going to stitch along those waistbands. So we're going to do our back stitch as normal. Now when you're stitching a slidey fabric, you want to, as much as possible, not be tempted to grip the fabric here because we stretch the fabric. So you're almost helping it by feeding it through. So you kind of always have a little bit of excess fabric in front of the machine foot. Otherwise, if you stretch it out of shape and then stay stitch it, you're actually stay stitching the stretch in place. Okay, so we're just going to gently go through to the end of this one. So I have said this, but I'm just going to remind you, you're not stitching any two bits of fabric together, it's just one single layer of fabric, and we're stitching along that waist edge at the top at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And you're going to do this to the back and the front. And then a back stitch at the end. Okay, so it's just one layer of fabric, guys, and we've just put a stay stitch in the top to stop anything stretching out of shape whilst we're using it. This one's actually the front. I'd like you to do the same to the back, and then I'll join you at the ironing machine and we'll have a look at how to do the darts. Okay, so let's work on the darts there that are on the back of the skirt. We'll show you the process of how to do that and pop that out of our way. Just for the camera's purposes, I don't usually use tailor's tacks to highlight my darts, but this fabric, I think you need those tailor's tacks. So hopefully you can see that bright yellow tailor's tacks there that highlights where the dart is, which I've transferred from the pattern. So what you're going to do, you're going to have the right side of the fabric facing upwards. So it's the part that you actually don't have the triangle drawn on. Tailor's tacks does mean you can see both actually, but generally you wouldn't be able to see it. So I'm going to fold the fabric in the middle here. So we're simply going to pick it up and move it over. The next step is to check that your lines match at the top. So I'm going to pop some pins in here and then I'll show you what I've actually done. Difficult sometimes to show you from the angle. Okay. So there you can see I folded the fabric, and if I open it up you can see that those two yellow stitch lines are actually matching. They're matching at the top here, and then when we get right down the bottom, it's that absolute point here that I'm interested in. So I'm going to put a pin at that point, like so. It's too easy when you stitch down to stop here because you think that's the end, but actually the point's quite a bit further down, so it's important that we do that. Once you've checked that everything matches from the top all the way down, we're just going to press it. Going to get some steam and we're just going to give it a nice press. Hopefully you will be able to see what difference that makes. So that's all nice and flat and we can easily stitch that dart down the side. Now we have 4 of these to do, guys, so I'm just going to take some time to repeat this process on all 4 darts and then we'll see each other back at the sewing machine. Okay, so we're back at the sewing machine and I've put the needle in at the top of the dart, and we're always going to start at the top of the dart and work our way towards the point. That is important. So we're going to start up here as we ordinarily would with our back stitch. I'm not paying any attention to the edge of the fabric. I'm focusing on the line that you've either drawn or stitched in place that is the dart line, and I'm making sure that I stitch precisely on top of that. So we're going nice and steady. When we're around about 2 centimetres from this pin at the bottom, that's the pin that marks the centre, marks the point. When we're around about 2 centimetres from there, I want you to reduce your stitch length by 1 whole number and keep stitching. It's important that we don't suddenly change the direction of this stitch because we will get a real horrible pucker at the end of our dart. It's a nice smooth line that doesn't deviate, and as we approach this pin we're going to turn our stitch length down to 1 and watch. We're just going to keep stitching in that same direction until we actually stitch off of the fabric. So my needle is actually stitching now in fresh air. We're going to lift up. There we go. So hopefully you can see, get it the right way around. Okay, so you can see my red line of stitching, and hopefully you can see it goes all the way off here at this point, and that will make a beautiful dart when we open up. So you can take, if you did use tailor's tacks, this is the point where you can take them out, so just pull. And then I shall see you at the ironing board to show you the best way to press a dart. So just to recap though, because it's a tricky one, a dart sometimes, we're going to stitch from here down to the point. So we start off our regular regular stitch length. We're not interested in the seam allowance this time, we're interested in stitching down that line precisely that was either drawn from the pattern or stitched on from the pattern. When we're approximately 2 centimetres from the point here, we're going to reduce our stitch length down. And then when we're about 1 centimetre away, we're going to make our stitch length number 1. And we're going to stitch all the way off of the fabric. That gives us a lovely smooth dart. Now I just want to say it's important we do these accurately, so from the transferring of the marks to the pinning, making sure that they match at the top and all the way down, because can you see how it's taking that much fabric out of the waistband? So if we take more, we've made it a smaller waistband. If we don't take enough, we've made that waistband bigger. So it's really important for the fit of your garment that we pay particular attention to these. Okay, so I'll let you run through and do all the other 4, and then we'll meet you at the ironing board and I'll show you the best way to press them. Alright guys. Okay, so we have all 4 of our darts done. There's one of them. I'm just going to show you the best way to press them. We're going to do this with all 4 darts, so we're going to get a bit of steam on our iron. We're going to press in one direction, and then we're going to press it back in the other direction. Notice I'm using the steam. Steam is your best friend, okay? We're going to press all of those beautifully. So we're going to go in one direction, and then in the other direction. We want the darts to finish so that they're facing the centre, so just make sure you've done that. Some people might say it's overkill, but I also like to flip them to the other side and press them on the side on the right side of the fabric, the side that you're going to see basically. It gives you a chance to work at the bottom of those darts a bit better. So you may need to pull your fabric out and just manipulate it so that you can get right into the bottom of that dart and get some steam on it. So what we have, that's the front. So you can see there is a dart here. The fact that it's difficult to see is because it's done properly. So yours should look beautiful. So whilst we're here, I'm just going to press the darts in the front as well. I know it's the front because the darts are much smaller. So if you've got lost in what darts what, or what side's what, then the one with the small darts is the front of your skirt. Okay, it's a good tip as well if you're not putting any labels or anything. It's a good tip for how to decide when you're putting it on as well. This morning when I got dressed, I made sure I had the small darts at the front. It's because the bigger darts take into account our bottom. That's the only reason for that. Okay. So we have the right sides of our fabric facing the ceiling. I'm going to take the back and I'm going to get the right side, so not the side with the darts showing, so that's the side with the darts showing. That side is going to face the ceiling and I'm going to simply lay it on top. On the left hand side, I want you to pin, just move you back, sorry guys, so that you can see what it is I'm up to. We're going to pin all the way down this side, matching the construction notches, and all the way down this side. And then I will meet you back at the sewing machine. It's important not to jump a step on this because we're not stitching all the way down on both of them, because one of them we're going to insert the zip. So we're getting to that crazy part, guys, where we're going to be looking at inserting a zip. Don't panic, I've got your back. We'll be absolutely fine. We're just going to do it nice and steady, nice and slow. We're going to take it step by step. That's the only way we get these things right. Break it down into small steps, one at a time, and I promise you, you'll be really pleased with the end result. I'm going to pin this other side, and then I'll see you back at the machine, guys. Right, so we're back at the machine. And we're simply going to stitch down one side all the way down to the bottom. So we're going to use a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So our fabric should be in line with that line that's on your plate here. So 1.5 centimetres. I forgot to adjust my stitch length from when I was doing the darts, guys. So you do that too. So put it back to your normal stitch length, which should be between 2.5 and 3. And then do your back stitch and off you go. Now, whilst I do this stitch, it's probably a good time to talk to you about seam finishes. At the beginning of the instructions, there is a little bit of information about the best way to finish the seams, but I just wanted to take a moment to explain how I'm going to do it in these tutorials. So, if your fabric isn't going to fray, something that's stretchy for example, you don't necessarily have to do any seam finishes. And then it's your choice going forward. So there is a kind of hierarchy of seam finishes. So we have pinking shears, and that's great for woven fabrics that are quite tightly woven, like a cotton for example, something that doesn't unravel whilst you're working with it. You can then use an overcasting foot. You can do a zigzag first down the edges. Then you can use an overcasting foot, and if you have the luxury of having an overlocker, you can overlock your seams. Now, for these actual tutorials, I am going to overlock my seams, but I'm just going to do it without you guys seeing, if that's okay, because I don't want people to be intimidated. Sorry, I'm putting my pins on the other side. I don't want people to think that they have to have an overlocker. There are other ways of doing it. So don't worry that when I come back after finishing any of my seams, suddenly my seams will be overlocked. You can use whichever seam finish you choose to use. Okay, so hopefully that's clearer. On this other side, we're only going to stitch, sorry, my notches come out. We're only going to stitch from, see the notch there? So we're going to stitch down from that notch. So we're not going to go above it, we're just going to simply, and it's important that you use the seam allowance. I know I say this all the time, but, oh, got a pin at you then. The reason it's important on this seam is if you don't do it, there is not enough seam allowance at the top to fix your zip to. So I can't stress this enough. When you're putting a zip in, if you're the kind of person who maybe doesn't always pay attention to your seam allowance, you really should do on these seams. On all seams, I will say that, but you've got no chance of getting your zip in if you don't do it on this seam. Okay, just come down to the bottom. And we'll do a back stitch. So the next thing that we're going to do is on this part of the seam, so above the notch, above where we've just stitched, we're going to leave around a centimetre gap, which is sort of the width of my little finger, okay? But we're going to stitch down to there. This is a basting stitch, so it's a temporary stitch that we are going to take out later. So we're going to make it as big as we can. So my machine goes up to a 4.5 stitch length, so I've put it all the way up to a 4.5, and we're not going to do any back stitches because that's the bit that anchors the thread in place. Because we're going to take it out in a moment, there's no point in doing that. So we're going to set off no back stitch using our correct seam allowance, 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and we're going to stitch until we're approximately 1 centimetre or a little finger width away from where we started before. Okay, which is about there. Not doing a back stitch, guys. Then we can take that off, and then we're going to go to the ironing board and we're going to press those seams open. So I will see you in a moment. Right then guys, so we're going to press these seams open. As you can see, it's all over the place. We need it nice and smooth, nice and crisp. So a bit like when we did the darts, we're going to press in one direction. Notice I'm pulling the fabric a little bit here because it's a curve, because we want to get that crease in the right place. Then we're going to go in the other direction. And I'm going to probably have to do the same. The last thing, because we're pressing them open, is to open them up. Now if you take your time and do it in that way, rather than opening them first, you'll get a much crisper seam. Okay? Take that through there. I do also like to press it from the other side, especially when it's something that we're going to put a zip into. But first of all, let's just do the other side. So we'll go through that again. So you might have to pull it. So one way and use that steam. And then in the other direction. Sorry if my arm is in the way. And then we open it up. And we're going to press it all the way down. You'll notice my seams are overlocked at this point. As I explained earlier, you can choose however you want to finish your seams, but do finish your seams. And notice I've finished each edge. I haven't done them together. If you do them together, you get a bulky seam to one side. It looks much nicer on the body, down the seams, if you can press them open like that. Now I'm just going to have to move the camera whilst I flip this around, and I'm going to press the other side, and then we will insert the zip. Hope you're ready, guys. Okay, so we were just out of camera when I've pressed the other side. It's just to make it nice and crisp, but you can do that without me showing you. We're going to take our zip then. So this is just a regular zip. There's nothing, it's not a concealed or an invisible zip, it's just a regular zip. And what we're going to do, this is the waistband, so this is the top. We're going to lay it down with the right side, so the actual zipper and teeth are going to be facing the fabric, like so. We're going to just unzip the zip for a moment, and we're going to concentrate on this side. So we're going to take the top of the zip, this bit that's normally cut with pinking shears, and we're going to match it with the top edge here. And we're also matching the teeth with the seam. So let me put a pin in, and then I'll see if we can get a little bit closer so you can see how I've actually done that. And I'm pinning all the way through to this side, guys, all the way through. So let me see if I can get you in a little bit closer. Hopefully you can see that. So the teeth here are as precise as I can be along that pressed stitch line. So we're going to just work our way down this edge. Now when you do it on an ironing board like this, just be careful you don't catch the ironing board to the back, otherwise you'll be finding it difficult to move it anywhere. So your zipper tape should go beyond where you left the gap when you were doing your basting stitch. Now if your seam allowances all work, you might be able to use the edge of your seam here as a guide for the tape, but the important bit is that centre, so don't worry too much about it. We're nearly at the end, so I'm just going to zip this zip up out of the way, and then I can continue down here. Once we've done down this side, we're going to do exactly the same down the other side. Now, I'm going to show you how to put this zip in using 2 steps. So the first step is going to use just your normal foot that's on your machine, just your regular foot, before we get involved in any zipper foot. So a lot of tutorials will head on straight in and start using your zipper foot, but I'd like to go for accuracy. So I'm going to add a step in. As you get more experience, then you may decide to miss this next step out, but certainly I would try it first. Or if you never get good results with your zips, maybe try this method. Just going to pull the zip down so that I can accurately pin the top here. I would definitely recommend the way that we're going to do it now for slippy and drapey fabric, to be fair, because it's really easy for it to come out of place and you get a bump at the back. So we're all pinned down each side, and our zip is probably, I don't know, let's say 10 centimetres from the top out of the way. Okay, so we're all pinned. I shall see you at the sewing machine. Okay guys, so first thing to notice, I have my normal foot there. Haven't got the zipper foot on, just my regular one. We're going to, with this stitch, we're going to stitch down the edge here, and then we can get rid of the pins, which makes using the zipper foot much easier. We're still set at that basting stitch. Sorry, I didn't realise the light wasn't on. We're still set up at the basting stitch, so our longest stitch that we can do. And again, we're not going to do a back stitch because we are going to be taking this out at some point. If your machine allows you to, I would move your needle across. Not so it's too close, but just to make sure it hits the tape. Okay, and then when you're ready, put the needle in. We're checking that we haven't got the back of the skirt underneath caught. That's one of the things you're going to need to keep checking. And once that needle's in, we can take that pin away. We're going to constantly be checking that this fabric is nice and smooth on this side, so there's no lumps and bumps underneath. And when you're ready, you're just going to nice and gently stitch down the side. This edge is up against the teeth of the zip. Hopefully you can see that. Now I'm going nice and steady so that you can see what I'm doing, but also this is just not something that needs to be rushed. You're going to go nice and gently, taking your pins out at the last minute. As soon as this zipper is in the way, we need to pull it up to the top. If we pull it to the bottom, it's always going to be in our way at some point. So if we pull it to the top, it'll be out of our way until we get back up to that top, okay? So we're going to put our needle in, that's important. Lift up our foot, and then we can push this out of the way. Now, sometimes they're easy, sometimes not so easy. But just know that the zipper can lock, so you may have to play with it a little bit. It's good to have some tweezers around as well, so you can get a hold of it and pull it up. That definitely does help. So I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom now, guys. Constantly checking this side of the fabric and taking our pins out as we go. Nice and steady. Some things you just need to take your time over. When you're at the bottom, remember we're not going to do any back stitch, so we can literally take that off, and then we're going to go to the other side of the zip and do the same thing. When we've got the zipper foot on, oh, we need to just pop our zipper out of the way again. When we do this with the zipper foot, you will go across the bottom and back up the other side. But for this, because we've got to take this stitching out, it's just less stitching to be worrying about. So no back stitch, and off we go. And this time we're checking this side that we've got no lumps and bumps. Nice and steady. We're checking underneath that we've got nothing caught, because that is a regular occurrence, guys, so just keep a check on that. Then when we're close to this, we're going to put our needle in, lift the foot up and pull our zip out of the way. There we go. Back down with the foot, checking there's nothing underneath, and we're off. If we rush this step, we'll be permanently putting ripples in the fabric, so that when we're like between the two stitch lines, so that when we actually use the zipper foot, we've already created the problem in the first instance. So just take your time on this one, nice and steady. Okay, so that's that bit done. So now we're going to put the zipper foot on. Let me show you what a zipper foot looks like. So a zipper foot has one big toe. Sometimes that toe is to one side, left or right, but this one is in the centre. So there are a couple of variations. The difference is, if I get the skirt back, so you notice when we used the regular foot here, there was only so close to these zipper teeth we could get because of this bit of metal on the foot. Whereas when we use the zipper foot, like so, hopefully you can see, we can go and stitch in that hole and it's very close to the edge. So the only difference is the foot. What you're doing in terms of stitching is exactly the same. You're just going to stitch in a nice straight line, and you're going to be stitching with this bit of the metal against the teeth of the zip. So first of all, we're just going to push that zip down again. Now we may struggle a little bit with this because we're going to be stitching closer. So when we come to moving it, it may not be as easy as it looked previous. Okay, so this is a permanent stitch, guys. So I'm just going to reset my machine. So this is your regular stitch. Sorry, I'm lying to you. This is a top stitch because you will see it on the other side. We're going to put this up by one hole. So mine's set at 3.5. We are going to do a back stitch though because it is permanent. So we're going to set off, do a couple of back stitches, and then we're nice and gently going to stitch down. So can you see how close I am to those teeth? I'm not on the teeth, I'm just nice and gently down the side of them. When this becomes a problem, needle down, lift your foot up, and fingers crossed this won't be horrible and take forever. Hey, do you know what? I think we've done it, guys. There we go. Foot back down. Check, we've got nothing caught underneath. And we're going to go all the way down, across and back up the other side. Again, no need to rush. Just going to go nice and steady. Keep constantly checking underneath. I'm going to put our needle in. I'm just at the bottom of where the teeth finish, so that's where I've stopped. I've put my needle in, lift the foot up, turn everything around 90 degrees, foot down, and you're going to go across that zip. Be very careful if your zip is metal. Make sure you pass the metal, otherwise it will break your needle. It's normally just 3 stitches to get to the right place, the other side of the zip. So if you feel more confident, you can do it by 1 stitch at a time by turning your flywheel instead of using the foot on the floor. Okay, so there we go, we're at the other side. Now I'm not rushing, I'm checking now that everything is in the right position before we set off, and we're ready. So we're just going up the other side of the zip. The metal is against the teeth, just like it was on the other side. And we're just very gently going to get right back up to that top edge. Our wonderful zipper will cause a problem again. And this is the one that's quite difficult to get rid of it. So let's see. I'm not going to go too close to it because I want a little bit of room for manoeuvre. I've put my needle in I'm just going to take it out a little bit to give us some space. So it's still in the fabric, but I've got distance here. I'm going to lift my foot up, and then we're going to push this out of the way. Now we say our prayer to the sewing gods at this point. Note that you can change it around. I'm glad it's been a little tricky, because it will prove to you guys that when you get stuck, it's not an easy thing to do. Now I'm going to show you a trick here. I'm going to take the foot off, because I can put that, because my needle is in, I'm not causing any problems by doing that, but it gives me a bit of room to get in. Come on, Mr. Zip. You know you want to. This is where you break your needles. Not your needles, your nails, sorry. And you decide you hate sewing. No, you wouldn't ever think that. You do need to make sure it's far enough back that it doesn't cause any problems with your foot. Okay. So now we're back in the zone. I've just popped my foot back on, and we're just going to continue until we're right back up at the top again, and then we're going to do our back stitch. Okay, so on this other side you should be able to see, so these outer ones are the basting stitches that we're going to take out later, but these are the stitches either side of that centre seam that you stitched, so they should be quite even on each side, and they're the ones we're going to unpick. Okay, so I'm going to unpick all the basting stitches, so these two outers and the centre seam, and I'll meet you back when I've done that. Right, let's take a moment to have a look at interfacing our facings. So first of all, we're going to take off the pins, take off the paper, and see what we have. So this one is the back facing. I'm going to mark with the chalk, which is the right side. Sorry, not with the chalk, with the soap, which I did earlier. I've marked this side. So I'm going to place the right side of the fabric down onto the ironing board. So it's the wrong side that's facing up. Okay, we should have a corresponding piece of interfacing then that we cut out using the same pattern. Now, can you see that side is shiny, but that side isn't? This side with the shiny, that's heat activated glue, and that's what we're going to put down facing the wrong side of your pattern piece. Now, today you're possibly using really movable fabric. I just want you to pay attention. The interfacing does not move, it does not lose its shape. So if it's cut accurately, that's the piece that we want to stay the same shape. So when you lay it down, if you have a mismatch between your fabric and your interfacing, let's say for example this was down here, it's the fabric you want to move to the shape of the interfacing. Okay, that's how we make sure everything stays in the same location. So we've got the iron. I've got it on quite a reasonable heat, but I've made sure it's not going to damage the fabric. So that is important. And we're going to use a stamping motion rather than an ironing motion. Okay, so I'll show you exactly what I mean. If we iron, we move things. That's the difference. So it's a real press that we're going to do. So we turned the steam off. We don't want steam for this because it will ripple the interfacing. Imagine if you put steam onto a piece of paper and it creates that ripple effect because of the moisture. Okay, so once you've stamped and it's stuck, you can then go over the top of it, and it's just to put a little bit more heat on there to make sure it's fixed. Okay, so that's that one done. I'm going to show you one more time on the front facing. Let's take those pins out. So I'm going to lay the facing with the correct side of the fabric facing the ironing board. So the wrong side is what I'm looking at. I'm going to take the shiny and place it face down. Then if anything needs to move, it's going to be the fabric and not the interfacing. Okay, and then we're going to use that pressing motion to make sure everything gets fixed. Now I have a confession to make. This is the second time I've filmed this for you guys. I sat down to do all the editing and for some reason this bit didn't film. So the next bit that I show you might look a bit strange because the skirt's actually complete, but I wanted to show you how to make sure you leave the gap on the right side. So this is the front facing here. I'm going to take the front facing and then I'm going to take your skirt. Now this has got the zip and everything in it and the facing on, but imagine it doesn't have the skirt at the bottom. So you have an opening where your zip has been inserted. You want to get the front of your dress. That's the one with the small darts, remember? So this is the front, sorry. Get it right. This is the front of the dress, skirt. I'm going to lay it so that the front's facing me. I'm going to take the front facing and lay it down right sides together like that. I'm going to take the back facing and I'm going to lift the skirt up and put it behind it. What that means is that the facings are facing the right side's fabrics. I know my zip's at this side, so I can take this side, match the two facing edges, pin them, and I know that I have my gap at the right side. Okay, so pin those and we'll go over to the sewing machine and stitch them. Okay, so just to check, I'm going to pick the skirt up. This is the zip. Just going to check that the opening, if I put the facing on there with the right sides of the facing the right sides of the dress, is my gap in the correct place. It is, so we're good to sew. I'll see you over there, guys. Okay, I figured you didn't need a close-up of this one, guys. We're just stitching down here at our normal 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So we're going to do our back stitch as always, and we're just going to take it down to the bottom and do a back stitch at the end there. Okay, it's the next bit that can be tricksy. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to press this seam open and I'll be back. Okay guys, so whilst I was gone, I pressed open that centre seam and I finished the long edge of the facing. So to drop that, which is step number 8 in your instructions. So I've finished the long edge, if I can hold it. There you go. I've overlocked it. You can do whatever method you choose to finish your seams, but I've overlocked those edges. So this is the tricksy bit. And this is also the bit that will help you understand why we've been so precise with everything. So it will help you to understand why we were so precise with the, my words won't come, with the darts, that's the word. We were so precise with the darts and we were really precise with these side seams that we only took the amount that we needed. And the proof is in attaching this facing. So I've just found the side seam, so not the one with the zip, the one without the zip. And I'm going to attach with the right sides together the facing. So this is the seam, here we go, on the facing. I'm going to stick it right sides and I'm going to match it to that side seam. And I won't sing to you, but if you like it, then you should have put a pin in it. As Beyonce says all the time, she says it, she does. We're going to pop a pin in. So we're going to make sure those seams are lovely and flat, laying lovely and flat on both sides. So that's our first point to match. Doesn't matter now whether you work on the front or the back, but whichever you choose, you should have a notch on the centre of your facing and also the centre of your skirt. So whether it's back or front, you should still have this. So these are the construction marks that you spent time making sure we're all in the right location. So we're going to put a pin in there. And then the other thing is that when you get to the other end, sorry, I'm just going to trim I've just got an extra bit of interfacing which won't help you to match anything. When we get to the other side where we've got the zip, we're going to overlap 1.5 centimetres. So I'm going to measure and then I'm going to come a bit closer and show you. Oh, I know where my measure has gone. There we go. So I'm just going to measure. Again, we're being precise. If you don't want to be precise, then you're probably going to end up in a whole heap of trouble. So I've measured 1.5 centimetres. I'm just going to pop a pin in and then I'm going to hold it up so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I matched the centre of the side seam that doesn't have the zip. I've then matched the centre of the skirt and then I've come all the way along to the zip. I'm going to flip this round and on the bit that's got the zip, you see that? I've got a 1.5 centimetre distance here and then I've put a pin in it. What that means is I have to make all the bits in between those pins work, okay? Now the front or the back, I forget, so this is the front. I think the front is much easier to do than the back. So I'm just going to match the front and then we're going to do exactly the same thing on the back. I want you to see how many pins I put in. I go a bit pin-tastic because we really do want it to stay in the shape that we're designed for. And if this is the bit where everything can slip out of place, and this is the lovely finishing part, you'll notice in your pile of things to do, you only have 2 pieces left, and that's the skirt at the bottom. I won't tempt fate and say that you're nearly done, because the gathering can take some time. But do you know what, guys? We're getting there. Okay, I'm working on the other side. I'm going to find the notch in the centre of the facing, and find and match it to the notch at the centre back. And we're going to put a pin in it. And then we're going to go to the zip edge and I'm going to measure again 1.5 centimetres. Not inches, 1.5 centimetres. And we're going to put another pin. Okay, so you can see this one, we're looking at this edge. Can you see how there's a little bit of excess fabric here and here? So we need to ease that into place. So I'm just going to put it on the table and then I'm going to bring you closer so you can see how I do that. Now easing is quite difficult, but there's a method to it. So let's have a look. I'm going to just bring you right down. So this is the section that we're working on. And it looked impossible, didn't it? But notice, when I lay it on the table, it actually forms that curve quite nicely. So we're just gently persuading that fabric to go into the position that we want it. And these have all been designed to work, guys, so it shouldn't cause you too much problem. But what you may end up with is a ripple up here above the pins. And that's normal. What is important is that where you're putting the pins should be approximately 1.5 centimetres down from the edge, which is your seam allowance. If you do that, what that actually does is it means, can't talk and concentrate. What that actually does is it means that the area that you're going to stitch is going to be flat. Okay, and all the ripples can do what they please above and beyond these pins, but where the pins go is nice and flat, and that's where you're going to stitch. So you can see I've got a few ripples, so I'm going to take that ripple, I'm going to smush it down, and I'm going to put a pin in it. And you see the ripple goes up to the top there. But where we're putting our pins is nice and flat. That's the important bit. You imagine if you'd have done your darts differently or your side seam differently, what would have ended up is that you would have had either too much fabric or not enough fabric to fit into this waistband. So if you are at this point and you're finding this bit incredibly difficult because either you've got too much or too little fabric in your waistband, what I'd like you to do is just go back and have a look at your accuracy. So that's not just the accuracy of your side seams, but the accuracy of your darts. If you imagine, if you do a 1/2 centimetre difference on your dart, and you've got 4 of them, but each of them has 2 bits of fabric coming together, so you've actually got a 4 centimetre problem, okay? Even though you only did a 1/2 centimetre inaccuracy, it accumulates to 4 centimetres, which is nearly 2 inches. So if it really is a struggle, and it is a little tricky, but if you do really struggle, then you need to go all the way back and check your accuracy. Everything about sewing is all about accuracy. If we're not accurate, we can't expect it to go together beautifully. And sometimes that's what causes us problems. Sometimes that's why we fall out with sewing, simply because we've not realised the importance of accuracy. I think we can all be accurate, but until it gets pointed out why you need to be accurate, I think we can all be a bit slapdash. I think everybody suffers from that. So be as accurate as you're capable of, and hopefully it makes sewing a pleasure for you. Okay, let's get this stitched. I'm going to bring you around in a second and you can see how I do it on the machine. Right then guys, I'm going to show you how to stitch it on the bit that was difficult to pin, so the bit with all these ripples everywhere, because I think it's important that you understand how to tackle them on the machine itself. So hopefully you can see, or else you believe, I've started it on the zip, okay, and I've got my regular 1.5 centimetre seam allowance that I'm looking at here. I'm going to do my normal back stitch as I always would, and we're remembering that we're actually stitching a curve. If you remember, we stitched 2 curves together, didn't we? So we're going to let it be a curve over here. Notice what happens to this fabric. So in a curve, it's quite flat, but look what happens when I do that. So there's no wonder you get all these pleats when you do it. So I'm just going to pull that around the corner, and we're going to constantly keep remembering I'm stitching a curve. Now this is a bit of a lump, but we're just going to use our fingers to manipulate the fabric one way or the other, and then where we stitch is going to be nice and flat. I'm stopping every so often because I'm rearranging the fabric. I'm making sure that we have that lovely curve and that I'm not creating any resistance to the machine being able to feed this fabric through. We're going to go nice and steady. Constantly watching the edge, making sure that we've got a really nice 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Thought the pin was on the other side of the fabric then. So we're going to go nice and steady. And we're going to do this all the way around so we'll get to the other side of the zip, guys. Okay, I'll meet you when we're all at the same point. Right, hopefully that wasn't too much of a trauma for you guys, but you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Okay, so you can notice that you have the original stay stitching line visible and then your stitch underneath it. So you should have 2 rows. Okay, what we're going to do now is an important step, and do not under any circumstances skip this. I know people do skip it and your garment will never look lovely. So let me explain what we're going to do. We're going to clip into the seam. So we're going to take some of the excess fabric out, because watch, when we turn this on the inside, which is the next step, can you see how it's all lumpy and bumpy and it's fighting against me? We need to take out some of the seam. So we're going to use the bottom lines, the line that you've just stitched, and we're going to be cutting little triangles out of the fabric. I'm just going to do a couple and then I can show you. Now, this is one of those things that you either do it or you don't do it. If you're going to do it properly. If you do it without doing it properly, you may as well not bother. So really do pay attention to this and put it in. Just checking which step we're on in the instructions. So we are on step 10. So this is step 10. So can you see, let's find something white, there we go. Can you see the triangles, and can you see how close I'm going to that stitch line? You need to be that close, so you're as close as you dare without cutting into them. If you're not that close, then it's not going to do what you need it to do, so be brave guys and do it. You'll also notice that you will cut through the stay stitching. That's absolutely fine now, because the line that you've just stitched is doing the job of the stay stitching. And the reason we did the stay stitching was to keep that waistband in the correct shape, ready for the facing. So we're past that point now, so it's no problem whatsoever. One thing I guess I should warn you about for this is you need to be incredibly careful that you don't accidentally snip the front of your skirt or the back. So I have my fingers underneath, so my fingers under here are just checking that I'm only cutting the seam and nothing else. The little tool that I'm using are called snips. They're incredibly sharp right to the end. I like to call them mini sheep shears because that's what they remind me of, but I'm a bit weird. But they're incredibly sharp. If you do it with scissors, I think what you'll find is you have to use the back of the blade. So if you slip, then you're going to cut straight through the waistband and the skirt. So if you are going to invest in some snips. Now, I think these cost me about £1.70, so they're not an expensive bit of kit, but I do think they're invaluable. They're great for cutting the threads off as well at the end, because you can cut really close to the garment. So when you're tidying everything up and neatening everything up, they're a great little investment. And super cute, I'm sorry. I just think they're cute. Useful and cute. That's how we like our tools. Right, whilst I crack on with this, guys, because you don't want to listen to me ramble on, I'm going to do this right to the other side, and then I'm going to meet you at the ironing board. Okay, happy snipping. Okay, so you should have cut all of your snips and triangles all the way around that waistband, and hopefully you've tidied up after yourself as well. Honest, I promise that I have. So the next step is to prepare ready for our understitching. Now I'll explain what understitching is when we get back to the machine, but I just want to show you what it is we're trying to do in this step. So this bit, the extra bit, is your seam allowance, and the instruction says to press your seam allowance up towards the facing. So all of these need to be pressed neatly up towards that facing. That's all this step means. So I'm going to pull my zip down as far as I can so we can open this up. I'm going to start at one end because why not? Gives us a little bit of logic to everything. And hopefully you can see what I'm going to do. So we're going to, if that's it, I'm just pulling here so that we actually press it right on the seam. If you're not careful, you can press it, but you still have like a little bit of the skirt fabric tucked underneath. So pay particular attention to that. Now it isn't going to like stick up there really nicely because it doesn't want to go that way. It naturally wants to fall in the other direction. But we're going to stitch that in place. So the first job is just to push it out of the way. Just going to do it to this seam, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do on the other side. I know that I'm constantly telling you to iron things twice. I won't apologise for that because it is needed. We're going to press it on the other side as well. I'm going to make sure that all of these are facing the ironing board. Does that make sense? They're all up there. And then I'm going to press the facing back. So I've ironed on both sides really. But it is worth doing. So we're going to work our way round. I'll just do this one side and then I'll show you what effect that has had. And then whilst we do it, I do the other side and you do this side. I'll leave you to it, and then there. So we've pressed them all up inside, but the difference it makes by doing it on the other side is that you get a really crisp seam here. Okay, so if you do that all the way around, and then I'll meet you back at the ironing board and explain what the next step is. Right guys, so understitching. The purpose of an understitch is to prevent this, when it's all nice and beautiful, from rolling back to the other side, so that when you wear the garment you can see it. So we're going to try and stitch it in place so that it prevents that happening. So it's a normal stitch setting, and what we're going to do is we're going to stitch close to the stitch line that attached the facing. Okay, you can see here there's two lines. One of them was the original stay stitch. You want to really be aiming between the two. Okay, so it's quite close. There's nothing really that will help you other than you going nice and steady and taking your time. Now, I did write in the instructions that this isn't going to lay all nice and flat. Look, it's going to be here and everywhere. But that's quite normal. You kind of just have to work with it, but make sure the bit that you're stitching is nice and flat, so you don't stitch any ripples or pleats into the fabric. So we're just going nice and steady all the way around. These little extra details are the ones that lots of people don't do. Now, if you're into quick fashion, maybe you don't want to do this. But if you're into something that you want to wear and you want to be proud of, and you want to show people these little details, then it's well worth doing. The difference does elevate your project. So keep stopping and pulling everything round. So there's a little bit of hand stitching to do, and then that's the top half of your skirt completely finished. So there's no needing to go back and hem things. So we're going to do the hand stitching part next. Starting off by putting a hook and eye at the top. Now, I didn't always put a hook and eye at the top, but I do think it's best. I did find one of the earlier prototypes, when I wear it, the zip just finds itself creeping down. So I think a hook and eye, just for safety's sake, guys, I think it's worth doing. Okay, just coming to the end. What I'm going to do when I've done this is meet you at the ironing board. We're going to press it, and then we're going to have a look at attaching that hook and eye first. Alright guys, see you in a minute. So you should have your lovely understitching showing, but only on the facing. See how it's above that seam? And what we're simply going to do now is we're going to press in place. So we're going to fold the facing under, and then we're just going to roll so that we're right on that seam, and we're going to simply press in place. So it can be a bit tricky, so spend some time doing this. Again, it's another one of those things that really does elevate your project. I look a bit strange the way I'm doing it, because I would ordinarily use the end of the ironing board to do it. But that's where you're sat today, sat on the end of my ironing board. See how lovely once you've pressed it, that fits. It should almost naturally want to go into this shape, simply because of the notches that you cut out first, and then this understitching should really help it to do that. Okay. I'm going to zip the zip up so that you get the full effect. You will have these bits left over, guys, don't worry about those, we will sort them out. But what I want you to notice is how lovely that now sits. Okay, so it's beautifully ready to go on here. Right, if you guys thread up a needle and we'll work out the next thing to do. See you in a moment. Okay guys, just to show you where I am. This is the inside of the zip and this is the facing the extra over. So if I bring it a bit closer, I'm going to put the hook part on first. So let me just get it into position and then I can show you. So can you see that the bits I have to stitch are this side of the row of stitching that stitch the actual zip on? That's to make sure that we don't stop the zip going up and down, okay? So I've held that in place and I've put my needle through, got it threaded. I haven't doubled up my thread because that gets you into all sorts of problems. I'm just going to pull until there's a tail left and then I'm going to go in and out. Now I'm actually just going through the zip tape, so that's the black bit. So I'm not going to the front of my fabric and I'm just doing little stitches. A couple of those in the same place will anchor my thread in place. I'm then just gonna go all the way around that loop. So I'm quite close together. Sorry, I'm trying to show you and stitch at the same time. Can be a bit awkward if you've not done much hand sewing. This doesn't have to be perfectly neat, it just needs to be secure and in the right location, guys. So don't get too stressed out about what it looks like if you're not the neatest of sewers. I promise you, it will not detract from your skirt. Just going to do one more stitch and show you. Okay, so that's how much I've done. I'm now going to do the bottom loop. I'll just bring it a bit close to me. So don't get all upset about somebody else's perfect stitching. This is just a necessity, yeah? We're not entering an embroidery competition, guys. We're just attaching a hook and eye. A lot of people who I teach get really stressed out when I mention hand stitching. There's no need to. Normally in dressmaking, any hand stitching is functional as opposed to pretty. So don't worry. Okay, I think that will do us. So when I get to the end, just like when I started, I'm just going to do a couple of small stitches in the same location. And by small, I do mean small, guys. I mean quite tiny. And then it's all anchored onto the fabric. So let's cut that one. Whilst we're working on this side, I want to show you then how to finish off the edge, which is a bit awkward. So we've got our hook there. So I'm going to fold this in, which was our seam allowance, and then I'm going to fold it down. I'm just going to put a pin and then I can show you what we're left with. You need to pin it anyway. Okay, so you can just see the little peak of the loop. What we're going to do is just going to whip stitch down this edge. Again, I'll show you what we mean by that. I'm going to start at the bottom and I am just going through the black tape. I'm trying to find the bit there, the black tape. And I'm just going to do, again, a couple of stitches in the same location just to anchor that down. I'm not going through the front of the skirt, sorry. I'm just going through the zipper tape. I'm then going to go on, move on a little bit. Hoping you can see there. I'm going to catch a little bit of the black zip and a little bit of the edge of the fabric and pull. Then I'm going to come back round to the front. I'm going to catch a little bit of the black and a little bit of the fabric. Now you don't have to do this all the way up, guys. You just need to do it, I don't know, halfway will be fine. You're keeping out of the way of those original stitches that stitched your zip on. I'll just take this to halfway and then you can see how it's left. I have to say the hand stitching is never my favourite part of a project, but there are some things that work much better if you hand stitch them. I'm just getting to the end of where I want to stitch, so again I'm doing a couple of stitches in exactly the same spot and then I can cut out. Okay, let me turn that round. So there's the hook hidden in there, and then I've stitched up to this location, yeah, on the zipper tape. We're going to move on to the other side because somewhere, I'm hoping I haven't lost it, is, there we go, is the other half of the hook and eye. So this is the bit that's got the hook on there. So we put the eye on, we now need to put the hook on. So we're going to put it in the same location on the other side. Now this one is a bit tricky because you've got the hook part to contend with. And I get all fingers and thumbs. Okay, so you can see. So this is the facing, this is the zip, and we're just going to put the hook. I've made sure it's in the same location as the other side so that they will actually match up. And we're going to do the same thing. Couple of stitches in the same location to anchor it. Then we're going to go around that loop until it's nice and secure. And then we're going to fold back the facing again and stitch it back down to the zipper tape. I'm going to let you persevere with that, guys, whilst I finish this off. Now the next step that we're going to work on is all about your skirt. So when you come back, if you bring along with you your 2 or 6 skirt panels. Now, if you have the smaller sizes, you will have 2 fabric panels on the fold. If you've got the larger sizes, then you will have 6 panels that are individual, so nothing on the fold. So there's a slight difference in the instructions on this one, guys, but we can handle that. All right, see you in a more. Okay, so we're back. No more hand stitching, I promise. Everything else is on your trusty machine. So I'm going to work on the skirt, which is the last bits that we need to do. First of all, we need to just be clear that some of you will have 2 pieces of fabric that are folded in half, and some of you will have 6 panels of fabric. Okay, so there is a slight difference, but once we've done this first step, everything else is the same. So if you have 6 panels of fabric, you're going to stitch them all together at those side seams until you create a big circle. Okay, so essentially 3 of your panels stitched together is the same as one of these panels. Okay, so you'll easily be in the same position. So I'm presuming now that you've stitched all of those 3 panels together to make 1 panel. Okay, and then we're going to stitch down the 2 edges. So we're going to pin, and that's the short edges. Yeah, we're going to pin and stitch down each of these. I'm going to use our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, which you will be very familiar with by now. Then we're going to press the seams open, which you should be very familiar with by now. And again, if you're doing the 6 panels, I'm expecting you to have done that on all of your seams. So you're going to stitch them, press them, and then use the finish of your choice. So whether you're not finishing them, you might be pinking shearing them, you might be zigzagging them, you may have an overcasting foot, yada yada yada, or you may have an overlocker. You will see eventually, miraculously, when we're doing our pressing, suddenly my seams will be overlocked by the power of magic. So yeah, that's what I'm expecting you to do. Everything pinned together. I'll just pin this and stitch it. Hoping you're finding this project okay. It's the second one in the Florence collection. So if you're doing this as a kind of learning how to sew, this is the second one. It's a tricky one, I won't lie to you, but hopefully having this video tutorial that you can refer back to will be really helpful along with your instructions in front of you. One of the biggest things with slidey fabric is letting it do what it should do. We have a temptation to move things all the time, whereas it's kind of less hands-on is a drapey fabric. So to make sure everything fits. If you struggle, just trust your cutting out. Pin at this end and then know that you have to make it work in between. Yeah, sometimes just a bit of faith in your own initial cutting out makes a big difference when you pin it. So I'll stitch through these. I'm going to do the next few steps slightly different to maybe what convention states. So a lot of the time, hemming of a garment is the last thing that you do, but we're going to do the hemming on this piece of fabric before we attach it to the top half of the skirt. The reason I do that is there's a lot of gather to this, so it's quite difficult to negotiate. So the next thing we're going to do after we've pressed and finished our seams is we're going to put the gather stitch in, but we're not going to pull the gather. We're then going to hem. Now, to do the gather stitch and to do the hemming, you will change the colour of your thread. It just makes life a little easier. You don't have to, I suppose. I'm going to, in terms of the demo. I had some feedback that would be a great idea because they got lost with which threads were which. So we are gonna change the thread colour. And when you change it, I want you to change it to something completely clashing. I'm gonna see in my box of tricks if I have like a bright yellow that will definitely stand up against this fabric. So I'm just stitching down the second seam. And then we're ready to press them open, finish the seams. I'll give you a chance to change the thread in your machine, and then I'll see you back here for the gathering. So you should notice that I have yellow thread now in my machine. I've increased the stitch length to 4.5, which is the highest stitch length that my machine has. So I urge you guys to do the same. This is a basting stitch, so we're not going to do any back stitching, and we're going to start on our gather at the top of this skirt. So our first row of stitching is going to be at 1 centimetre. Okay, so we're going to have a slightly smaller amount of fabric here. We're at 1 centimetre, not 1.5 centimetres. Now, if you are doing the smaller sizes, you're going to go from seam to the next seam, stop, and then do a new row on the back. If you are doing the larger ones and you've stitched 6 panels together to create your circle, you're going to stitch this from one seam across 3 and then the same on the other side. Okay, so it's very simple, no back stitch, and we're just going to go for it, and we're going to stitch until we get to the next seam. You can see how that yellow really contrasts with the fabric, so it'll be much easier to take out at the end. Okay. I'm just about to the other seam, so I'm going to stop stitching, lift my needle up if it's in the fabric, and take the fabric away. I want you to leave quite a decent size tail there, because that's what we're going to pull to do the gather. We're going to go right back to where we started, and we're going to repeat the process from the same seam, but we're going to stitch a row of stitching that's at 2 centimetres. What this means is that where you're going to stitch at 1.5 when you actually attach it to your skirt is going to be between these 2 yellow lines. So it does make stitching a little bit easier. But the purpose of this is so that you get a really lovely even gather, and it helps to prevent your gathers being caught kind of up here, because it keeps them in the correct location. So we're going to do this right to the other end. And then whilst we're here, we're going to hem it. Now I may have already said, but I hem this before we attach it to the skirt. I just think it's easier with all the fabric. If you prefer to do it the other way around and do your hem last, that's fine, but it's the same process that you will follow. So you may as well do the tacking, the basting, sorry, that I'm going to explain to you at the same time. Come to the seam again, I've lifted up and I've pulled everything out. So you're going to do that twice, so 2 rows of stitching across the front of your skirt and across the back, okay? Now we talked about the hem, so whilst we have the yellow threading, we're going to put a basting stitch along the bottom edge of our skirt, and the next step I'll explain why we do that. But we're going to put it at a 2 centimetre seam allowance because that's what the hem allowance is on this project. So we're not stitching anything to anything, very similar to how we just did the gather. We're going to go at 2 centimetres all the way around the hem. I'll leave you guys to do that. When you've finished, I'll see you at the ironing board and we'll press this hem. As I said, if you want to do that last, that's not a problem. You can just go straight onto the gathering. Okay guys, right, so we're going to do the hem before we attach the skirt. As I've said, you can do this like a traditional one if you like and do it last, but it's the same method. So you've stitched a bright yellow line at the seam allowance, 1.5 centimetres, okay? We're going to use that as our guide. So we're going to use that as something that we can press up to. Now, sorry, this loose threads in the way. Let's get rid of those. I have a habit of not getting rid of my loose threads and it always comes back to haunt me. So we're going to use this as our guide. So I have got this skirt, just to prove it, there's the seam, with the wrong sides facing upward. So what we can see is the wrong side of the fabric. And we're going to use that stitch line as a guide. So we're just going to fold it on that line and press. Now this is great for fabrics that are a lightweight fabric, but it's also great for anything that's curved because it gives you an idea of what you're pressing to. I promise you, it feels like it's an extra step, but it really is worth doing, especially to get a lovely finish that you're wanting. Once we've done that, we're going to take the raw edge and we're going to tuck it all the way under to that stitch line, and then we're going to put a pin in it. Again, if you're doing it on the ironing board, just be careful you don't actually catch the ironing board, because when you come to move your skirt, you take it all with you. And I promise that is spoken from experience. Okay, so we're going to tuck them under. Notice, I'm hoping you can see this, but I am pinning right at the point where I've tucked under. So not close to the bottom edge, but close to the fold of the hem. That's because that's the bit I'm trying to keep in place. That's the bit that we're going to stitch, and that's what we want to try and do. So we're going to, when we get to the sewing machine, because there is a lot of hem to get through, guys, appreciate that, but to get that lovely swish at the bottom of the skirt, we do need quite a bit of fabric. Once we've pinned them, we're going to give it a last blast of steam with the iron. And we're going to work our way all the way around. Now, it is going to be time consuming, guys, but I promise you, it really is worth it. And then when you've done, I'll meet you back at the sewing machine and we'll stitch it. Phew, guys, I'm not the only one who's probably pleased that that hem's finished. So I'm here at the machine, we're going to stitch that hem. You're going to use a stitch length of 3.5. That's because you see this on the other side. Now, a moment ago, I was going to show you this and I realised I still had yellow thread. So before you begin, check you have the correct colour thread and then we can go. So notice I want to stitch on this edge where the pins are. Okay, just take a moment to see how close my pins are. That's not because I like pins, although I do like pins, but that's how close they need to be. As soon as one's not there, you'll find it difficult to keep this hem in place. So we're going to start off with a back stitch, like always, and we're going to stitch nice and gently. And we're going to take these pins out at the last moment. So we're not going to stitch over them, we're not going to be dangerous, but we're going to take them out at the last moment. And we're going to nice and gently work our way around. Now there's a lot of hemming to do, guys. And the next step is the gathering. So once you've stitched this hem, other than a whole load of pinning, there is one more row of stitching to do. And then you can have your ta-da moment. Alright guys, I'll leave you to do this without me waffling on. When we come back, we're going to need the top of your skirt again, the skirt yoke, as well as the skirt bottom that we're hemming here. And we'll get that gathering done. See you in a minute. Okay then guys, who's ready to do the gathering? It's going to be tricky, but once you've done it, you're finished. Right. So I want you to have your skirt, sorry, put it the right way around. Your skirt the right way around, so not inside out. I want it the correct way around that you would wear it. And I'm going to place it like that on the table. So the raw edge is at the top here. I will put the camera at a better angle when we get to that bit. Then I want you to take your skirt bottom that you've just hemmed, and I want you to have it inside out. Now it's going to be tricky because there's lots of fabric. So we're going to have it inside out. Nearly got it, there we go. Inside out. So I can see all of the seam edges here. And I'm going to slip the skirt inside that. So the right sides of the skirt are going to face each other. So the skirt is inside the circle. Does that make sense? Probably. If it doesn't, I'll pick it up in a second and you can see. We're going to work on either the front or the back first. So you want to take the side hem of your skirt, match and pin it to the side edge of your bottom edge of your skirt. So if you've got the 3 panels together, match it to one seam, and then the other side that we're going to match, you're going to match the third, so one seam match, miss, 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 would be the 4th seam. So you're going to leave 2, and then the 4th seam you're going to pin and match at the other side. That should coincide with where you did your gathering stitches, I should say. So if you've got the 6 panels together, think about where you did your gathering stitches, and the start of the gathering stitch wants to be on one side of the skirt and the end of it on the other side of the skirt. Yeah, otherwise that will confuse matters. So I've put a pin in those 2 seams. You should then have a construction mark in the middle. Yep, there we go. In the middle of the lower skirt, and also a corresponding one in the middle. Yay! It's happy when it's a happy coincidence. It's all in my hand. So I'm going to match those 2 notches. So it keeps slipping. I'm sure you're having the same problem. It keeps slipping off the table. So I'll pin this, and then I'm going to recap what we've actually got in front of us. So we have the top half of the skirt the correct way around, and it is inside this loop. So I have matched the side seam here, I've matched the centre point here, and then I've matched the side seam over here. And it's not until that point that we start to gather, because we know what we're gathering. So the first bit of gather is between these 2 pins, the side seam and the centre, and we're gathering all of this material so that it matches. So for those of you that's new to gathering, what you're going to do is you're going to go right to the end where you started, and you're going to find 2 of the tails. Now you might need a pin to pull them out. There we go. So there are 2 tail ends there. Let's see, and as luck would have it, they're the 2 that gather easily. I'll turn this around and you can see. So can you see when I pull them, the fabric relatively easily gathers along. If they hadn't have done it easily, try the 2 at the back. Okay, there's only 2 options, but you're pulling 2 at the same. Oops, sorry, you're pulling 2 at the same time. I'm going to tie them in a knot, just so that I don't lose them. Okay, and I'm going to keep gathering. Now I want you to do this gently. There's a lot of gather to be had, and I want you to do it gently, and I want you to pull it to that centre pin. Now there's no point having all the gather all bunched up at the beginning, so I want you to gently persuade it along these threads. Now a word of warning, if you break these threads, you've got to stitch them all again and start the gathering process all over again. So I really can't stress the nice and gentle movement that you need to do. It's going to take a while, yeah, so don't think it's going to be a quick process. It's going to take a while, but it will be worth it. But you're going to be gathering these 2 bits so that the skirt bottom that you're gathering, the distance matches this distance here. So we're going to gather all of this so that it matches in length that distance there. And then we're going to go pin-tastic. If you think we went pin-tastic on the hem, you ain't seen nothing until we've done the gather. I'm going to do one of these whilst the video is running. I think it's quite important for you to see how long this takes as a process. And then I will leave you to your leisure to do the other ones. But I want to show you one of them in full. Obviously, the different size skirts will take longer to gather, but at least you get to see the process. I don't think I'm that far off, so let me hold that up for you so you can see. So that's the side that I've gathered, and you see at the back, that's the skirt. So they're not actually very different now in length, but you can see that the gather, it doesn't look great. It's all bunched up in the middle. So I'm just going to lay that flat, and I'll angle the camera better so that you can see what I'm up to. And we're just going to make that gather even. It is as simple as that, and then we're going to pin it in place. So I'm going to just put you down so that you can see. So this is the gather that we're working on. So I'm just going to gently persuade it into a more even scenario. In doing that, sometimes you actually end up taking some of the gather out, so you have to pull a little bit more. That's fine. I don't think we're too bad. So it's a bit tricky at the ends, guys, so pay just a bit of attention, sort of where you're matching it with the pins. I think that isn't too bad. So you can see it's nice and even, and it matches. So you need lots of pins, which I should have had earlier. And I'm going to start in the middle. And by the middle, I mean the middle of this section. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin approximately in the middle. I'm going to use pins that have the end because it's easy to see. And I'm going to put the pins in that direction. Just means that we're actually pinning the correct location. I'm going to make sure that the gather isn't tucked under when I'm doing this as well. Because if it is, you will see that raw edge after you've stitched. So I am going to go pin-tastic, but I'm doing it in half. So now I'm going to pin the half of this section. Okay, so that was my original centre point pin, and that's my original side seam pin. So we're just going, and I'm going to keep pulling this fabric just down in this direction. Need a pin here, checking that there's nothing underneath that's going to get caught. And we're going to pin. Gathering it can be forgiving, but if you don't gather it evenly, it won't look right. So really pay some time on this. This is the last step, guys, and your skirt is finished. So don't get frustrated on the last part and ruin all your good work. Really spend some time. And there's nothing wrong with pausing and coming back to it later. I'll be honest, if I wasn't recording, I may have paused and come back later. I think you might have noticed if I had different clothes on. I haven't got are they called continuity people in the TV industry? I haven't got one of those around the corner checking. I mean, I know that you can see how professional these recordings are, obviously. But believe me and you, there's not a recording team behind me. There's just little old me trying my bestest. Okay. Right. Just think I need one more pin here, and then I'm just going to show you that section. Okay, so that's all evenly gathered. Sorry, sit back down. But look at the back. See how flat that is at the back. So there's no ripples or gathers in that back. They're all at the front. So that big piece of fabric has been gathered to the right length, and then we've pinned it in place. And making sure none of these raw edges are tucked under. They've all been pulled out. And trying as best we can to make everything in terms of this gather go straight down here. So it's not all like that. If it was all pinned like that, that is how you would stitch it. So we're constantly just pulling it down, and we will do that when we're stitching, guys, as well. We're just constantly giving it a little pull down, persuading it to go where we want it to go. Okay, that's one section of 4, guys. I shall meet you back here when we've pinned everything and gathered everything. Okay, good luck. Okay, so you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Okay, so everything's gathered and your skirt is inside. Just before we stitch, just check that the right sides of the skirt top and skirt bottom are facing each other. You don't want to stitch all of this and then have to undo it all, because it's really difficult with the gather. Okay, so have a check. We're also going to take this part of the machine off because it just makes life a little bit easier. And then we're going to place the skirt over the machine like that. So this bit prevents us from stitching the bottom of the skirt. But what can happen quite easily with this gather and the slippy fabric is that the skirt underneath slips and you end up catching it. So I'm going to be constantly checking as I'm stitching the underside skirt that we don't catch it. So that's why I keep stopping and starting. So I'm going to bring you round, and then you can see in detail how I'm negotiating this wonderful gather. Okay, guys, so there's a lot of skirt to contend with, so hopefully you're going to take your time with this. So we're going to keep our 1.5 seam allowance, which should mean we're stitching between the 2 yellow rows of gather. You will constantly, as I said, see me checking underneath that this hasn't slipped up like that, so that's one thing we're checking. But I will also be constantly pushing these pleats in this direction, just tugging at them, because I don't want to stitch them all like that because it won't hang nicely. So just take your time. As always, we're going to start with a back stitch, and we're going to take the pins out as we go, guys. I'm not a big fan of stitching over pins One is that if it does break a pin or a needle, it's going to go up into your face and it could really damage your eyes. So that's the health and safety message. But the other one is, if it does hit a pin with some force, it's going to knock the timing out of your machine. And that's a trip to the sewing machine repairman for a kind of £40–50 bill. So if you don't value your eyesight, value your purse, okay? So always take them out as you go. You've got to take them out at some point anyway, so you're not saving any time really stitching over them, or at least that's my view. Right guys, so we're off. So I am going to take the pins out at the last moment though. And throw them everywhere. So we're nice and steady. And again, I'm just constantly making sure that I pull these pleats, and I'm checking underneath that nothing is getting into trouble. Now the reason I have to check underneath on this project, see, ordinarily I would use these fingers to feel the top, but there's obviously lots of purposeful pleats and gathers here at the top, so it's really difficult to, by feel alone, make sure everything underneath is as it should be. So just keep checking. Thankfully this seam isn't as long as the gathered seam because we're just stitching around the bottom of the skirt. So before you know it, you will be back at the other side. Gathering is a tricksy little technique, but hopefully you'll agree that what you get from this technique is something quite cute, quite special. There's lots of projects nowadays that use the gather to great effect really. You can gather sleeves, you can gather tops of trousers, bottoms of trousers, you can put flounces on the end of anything really actually when I come to think about it. So it is a good technique to have in your armoury, as I like to say, because that's what we're doing. We're just building up techniques when we're sewing. And each technique has its own difficulty, its own complication. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a technique now, would it? Okay, I'm getting to the seam, which marks the halfway point. Always nice to know you're halfway. And sometimes it's at these seams where the direction changes, where you can easily get the underneath all caught, so do take your time to check. This thread is just the gather. There we go. I could just see that pleat going sideways, so just took time out to make sure it does what we want it to do. I suppose the thing with sewing is to realise that you're in charge. I hear lots of people say, oh, well, I tried to do that, but it just did this. Well, it's doing what you're telling it. So you are in charge. and you need to either manipulate the fabric or do whatever the machine needs to be told what to do, but you are in charge, guys. I'm not sure if a lot of mistakes come from rushing. Oh, really? I think we see lots of people do tutorials and they go really fast with everything, they don't pin anything, and that's fine if you're experienced, but I think it intimidates a lot of people and makes them think that that's what they need to do. They need to go that fast, they don't need to pin. I'm not so sure you'll ever be happy with your results if you approach it the same as those people do. And that's not me talking about anybody in particular. That's just my experience in my classes that I've taught over the years. People lose their confidence really quickly by comparing themselves to somebody else. I think you need to be careful who that somebody else is and what it is that they're doing and what experience they have. I'd like to hope and think that the tutorials that you get from SizeMe are all about building your confidence and helping you achieve those great results. Maybe at a slower pace than what you can see others doing it, but hey ho, if you get to the answer, does it matter how long it took you? Not long now, guys. Okay, so this is the seam that we started off with all these horrible gathering stitches. And a back stitch to finish. Okay, so before we do the big reveal, I'm going to take this away. I'm going to get rid of all of these white and yellow gathering stitches, and I'm also going to get rid of this this basting stitch that we did on the hem. Give it all a good old press, and then we'll have our ta-da moment, guys. Okay, see you soon. Okay, guys, are you ready? Ta-da! Let's stand up, let's get a good look at it. It's all swishy swishy at the bottom. Hopefully you have a beautiful skirt just like this one. Hopefully you've learned a few things and hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'm really passionate about delivering the video tutorial alongside our patterns. I think it makes a massive difference to everybody, not just newbies into sewing, but everybody's journey. There's always different ways of doing things. I like to sprinkle it all with a few hints and tips. Hopefully that's helpful to you. I would love to know if you found them helpful, and I would love to see the projects that you finished. If you contact me on any of our social media channels, tag me away in any of your comments, any of your pictures. I really would love to see what you make, guys. Seeing the different fabrics really makes my day. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll see you for the next one. All right, guys, you take care. Bye.